Steve Reeves wasn't looking like that to make money. This was something that was in him. It was a passion. He didn't have a blueprint of other athletes that looked like him to follow behind. He was one of the original cats that opened the door for all of us to follow. If you're a guy, you want to look like that. And if you're a woman, you want to have that.
Yes.
This back double bicep is the visual that I had when I would train my back.
Okay.
That's what I wanted my back to look like.
Shawn Ray, you are probably the greatest bodybuilding historian that I personally know.
Thank you. I mean, it's a compliment considering I've been around bodybuilding a lot longer than you, and there's some very knowledgeable people. I would go with the great late Peter McGough as one of the great historians. The late Sean Perrine from Muscle and Fitness was a great historian. I pride myself on knowing these things. Wayne Galash out of Australia. Of course, you have John Balick, who literally went through the whole thing. But I've had some pretty good role models to follow behind. And I got some guys that keep me on my toes. Bob Chick keeps me on my toes. Dave Lieberman keeps me on. John Hansen. They would all argue that they're smarter and they have more knowledge, but we are smart in different areas. Like there's things I know very well, whereas like I defer to John Hansen for like NABA WABA type stuff and Bob Chick for the AAU. So I'm still learning.
But you're proving my point right now. Just by bringing up all these names who are also great bodybuilding historians, you're also proving my point in that you know people who are also great bodybuilding historians.
Yeah, well, that's how you get better, right? You surround yourself with great minds and you hope some of it rubs off. But my passion for the sport has me digging deep into the annals of bodybuilding, knowing where it originated, working for Joe Weider for 18 years and his brother Ben, and being familiar with all the great photographers that took the pictures of these great athletes. And then, of course, I pride myself in knowing all of the Mr. Olympia champions, all of them. You know, I think we have 19, including the latest Samson Dowda, that's how you say it, Samson Dowda. From England. I don't know him well, but I know him, and it's one of those things. When I started bodybuilding, I used to see the Sandow Trophy in the magazines, and now it's like I competed for the trophy, I've held the trophy, I've met the champions. It's a very complete, rich career when you know the athletes that are winning and you know the guys that have won and you know the guy that created it.
Right. Seeing all the generational changes in the Sandow, right? Seeing all the generational changes in the champion of the Olympia. It's important, I think, to go back and look at where the evolution came from, right? Like who paved the way? Because I think it's hard for people to wrap their head around what a trailblazer really truly entails. I mean, somebody who paves a way without anyone showing them the way. And that is a huge, huge thing to think about. So
I mean, you can see kind of where the end zone is if you know someone that's already been there.
Exactly.
For example. But if you're the first and you're the pioneer, you're kind of treading on uncharted territory, and then you set your flag and you challenge other people to surpass it. I imagine that's kind of how Jesse Owens was in the Olympic Games. He set that mark and then everybody chased after that mark. And eventually you're going to get there. You're going to evolution and technology. And that's kind of how it was for Arnold, because he was one of those guys that his idol was Reg Park out of South Africa, but Arnold was much better than Reg Park. Reg Park was great for his time, but Arnold saw that, idolized that, surpassed that, and he raised the bar for everyone that came thereafter.
Right. So we're going to talk about a lot of different people, and we'll probably do multiple parts to this series, but I wanted to particularly start with a gentleman named Steve Reeves. And you know him well. So tell me a little bit about Steve Reeves, what you know about him, and then I want to know your thoughts on his physique.
You know, he's pre-Shawn Ray, right? He goes back in the days, but I don't think there was a man or a woman that didn't want that. I mean, that look personified.
A man or a woman who didn't want that.
I'm saying, if you're a guy, you want to look like that, and if you're a woman, you want to have that.
Yes.
Steve Reeves personified exactly what a complete physique looked like. Tiny waist, the flaring shoulders, the nice full rib cage. His legs were decent, and his calves, by today's standards, they'd be considered small, but he was very proportionate, and he's a taller guy. He's a 6-footer. Became an actor. He was very marketable. This is what Joe Weider would want to push in the magazines. And of course, following Steve Reeves, the next great emulator of that was from my era, and that would have been Bob Paris in 1983. That's the year I started bodybuilding. And Bob Paris had a training partner named Roy Littlemeyer back in 1982 as he prepared for the 83 Nationals. And Bob was a knockoff of Steve Reeves. It was a throwback.
Yeah.
Steve Reeves opened that door, and I'm sure Bob Paris along the way steadied the way the guy wore his hair, the kind of clothes he wore. The posing trunks were a lot different. They're more along the lines of the classic physique division we have today. Bigger in the waist, but I mean, if you put regular bodybuilding posing trunks on Steve Reeves, he could be right in the mix today, even though that physique is 50, 60 years old.
Yeah.
Definitely movie star good looks and the physique to match it.
Yeah, I think the movie star component is probably part of what sparked people's interest in wanting to look like this. Sure. I mean, being in the Sandals and Swords films and people seeing him in
Hollywood's bright lights, man. Yeah.
I think that all of a sudden it's kind of like social media is today, right? You see a physique and then you see how people respond to that physique and then, oh, I want that physique.
Well, the crazy thing for Steve is that, he wasn't doing that for money.
Yeah.
Right? The guys today are looking $600,000 for the Mr. Olympia.
Right.
You don't get that at the smaller shows, but when you're training, you're dreaming of that. That's the end game, right? I want to be the next Mr. Olympia, not only this elusive Sandow, but the financial component, and then the other things that you can make money from. Steve Reeves wasn't looking like that to make money. This was something that was in him. It was a passion. He didn't have a blueprint of other athletes that looked like him to follow behind. He was one of the original cats that opened the door for all of us to follow. Yeah. And he did it right. Like, this is a physique that you'd see like in Greece, right? Or like in the Roman Empire, a gladiator. Yeah. And he played it to the hilt because Hollywood liked that. Yeah. It played to his strength and they embraced him. He was, even in his old age, he was going to shows like the Arnold Classic, and he was hanging out with the boys like Jack LaLanne, and we knew who he was and what he looked like and what he did, and it was always impressionable on the way we perform, on the way we pose. I mean, just that standing, relaxed pose, that's a pose that we do today on the Olympia stage.
I know.
And that's a natural looking, relaxed pose. Yeah. He nailed it back then, and he had nothing to compare that with.
I know that's the thing that I have a hard time wrapping my head around, because like to know that like a small waist and an X frame would be aesthetic. A lot of people when they start training, they just think, oh, just put muscle everywhere, and they don't really necessarily think about the aesthetics. I think we've seen so many aesthetic physiques that we don't realize where it all started. Who really thought of those lines in the very early days.
Well, don't get it wrong. There's a lot of people that would love to look like Steve Reeves. They didn't know how. The magazines were just barely coming out back in those days, but people were doing strongman stuff. Yeah. And so the big, bulky, chunky guy was revered at the time because they're an anomaly. There weren't a lot of them. And the way you show your strength was how much you can lift.
Right.
But showing your physique the way he was at the time he was doing it, he was a unicorn, and he was doing it on a different level because he had the right genetics and proportions, which really takes your eye from looking at a big, chunky, strong man to looking at an aesthetic physique like Steve. He didn't overdo it.
Yeah. Samir.
Yes, the Lion of Lebanon.
Samir is one of your good friends.
Absolutely.
I adore Samir. I think what I think is cool about Samir is that he's still so passionate about bodybuilding.
Oh yes, 100%.
He's in the scene. He's so ingrained in the whole world still. To me, and I'll just start off by saying, one of the things that I have always admired about Samir is I don't know if I've ever seen someone who has such a beautiful, full muscle bellies. Sure. And it's almost like the quintessential component to that golden era that I think a lot of guys afterwards were really trying to shoot for. You know what I mean?
Well, he had some pretty good examples to follow behind. I know Samir's story very well. One time when he was like 15 years old, he was going to see a movie with his brother, and I forget the actor's name, but I think it was Van Cleef from like one of those Clint Eastwood type shoot 'em up movies. Yeah. And he chose to buy the magazine that Arnold was on, rather than go see the movie that his brother wanted to see, which starred his favorite actor.
With the money that he had.
Yeah, with the money that he had. And it was that magazine that spawned him into this world of bodybuilding. And mind you, 1983 is when I started bodybuilding. That was also the year that Samir won the Mr. Olympia.
Yes.
So two of the guys I modeled myself behind when I started, and I got my first real glimpse of what it's supposed to look like, Bob Paris, who copied Steve Reeves, was a knockoff of Steve Reeves, won the Nationals in the universe. And then there was Samir Bannout, who peaked in the 1983 Olympia. It wasn't his first shot, but it was the one that put him in the history books, because you only have to nail it once, and he nailed it perfectly in 83. So when I'm coming up, I recognize it. Samir's 5'7", he's my size. Yeah. You know, Bob Paris was 6 feet, like Steve Reeves. It was not really something I could aspire to. Yeah. But the mannerisms and the way he performed on stage, it mixed with the way the Lion of Lebanon moved on stage, that attracted me.
I like that you call him the Lion of Lebanon. That was his name.
Because, you know, and he is a unicorn out of Lebanon, because he's the number one guy. But Samir showed that through perseverance, timing and peaking was everything. And he peaked perfectly in Munich in 1983 to win the Mr. Olympia, go down as one of the legends and the best that ever did it. He was a performer on the stage, still passionate in bodybuilding. Saw him at the Olympia this year. One of the first guys to demonstrate the Christmas tree. It's coveted because not everybody can get lean enough to see that Christmas tree. And of course, we all trained for that look, and I got it a few times in my career. But I was patterning myself after Samir. I watched the way he moved on the stage, kind of combined that with a Bob Paris and a Lila Brada, and my performance I leveled up my performance part and partial to what Samir was doing on stage in his presentation. Yeah.
What's crazy is his conditioning was so perfect that he was lean enough for you to see Christmas tree, but you don't see striations or veins or graininess. It's just pretty.
Yeah,
full.
And it was a different time, right? The criteria was a little bit different. The science wasn't there in 1983. He's one of the few guys to ever beat the greatest bodybuilder of all time in the form of Lee Haney. Lee Haney's debut in the Olympia was in 1983, and it was against Samir. Samir won that show. Lee Haney got third behind Mohamed Makaway from Egypt, and Mohamed Makaway smaller than Samir, but he was more proportionate, a little more mature. Right. Lee Haney was taller, still a work in progress, but Samir will forever be able to say he was one of the greatest bodybuilders of all time, and one of the only people to beat the great Lee Haney.
Right. I think similar to Frank Zane, a lot of people turn to Samir's posing to get those classic poses. Sure. You know, he had the posing down to a science.
Yeah, I think that bode well for him on the stage. It's also taken him all around the world, which I think is lost on the bodybuilders today, that the importance of presentation for us coming up and me copying guys like Samir, it took me all around the world. I mean, I never won the Olympia, and I didn't have to. I performed at such a higher level than my colleagues that they wanted to see this performance in Germany. They wanted to see it in Russia. They wanted to see it in Mexico and Canada. And I understood the importance of presentation, which was another component for revenue that would finance my bodybuilding career. Today, I don't think there's a single bodybuilder, with the exception of the current Mr. Olympia, Samson, that understands presentation creates opportunity. Opportunity creates revenue. It feeds the machine, and you're able to take it places. There's not very many bodybuilders after the Mr. Olympia is over that are going around performing at shows the way that Samir did, that opened the door for me to do.
And to your point, I mean, he did win the Olympia, but I don't necessarily think that winning the Olympia is the only avenue to being one of the best. I mean,
it's not, because listen, when you compete with the best, I think we talked about this, when you compete with the best, you validate that you're one of the best. Samir became Mr. Olympia because everyone was pushing him. He felt the heat of the arrival of Lee Haney in 1983 after Lee won the national championships in the universe. That gave me
chills.
Yeah. So here comes Lee Haney. Yeah. Samir's been in the Olympia. He knows this upstart's coming. Yeah. He's going up against the magical Egyptian from Canada by way of Egypt, Mohamed Makaway. Right. He knows he's going to be a performer at the Olympia. He has to elevate his game. All those Olympia champions are champions because of the people that were pursuing them. And I was in hot pursuit. Moment. Yeah, I was in hot pursuit of every Mr. Olympia winner. And that helped me become the person I became on that stage, because I was chasing those guys. But they knew we were chasing them, and they had to push harder. So the challenge does give way to champions like that.
Man, what an exciting win. I just can't even. Let's see, who do we have next? Okay. Serge Nubret.
Serge Nubret.
Yes.
French.
Serge Nubret. Thank you for correcting me. Yes.
He's French from France.
Yeah. His physique is one of my favorites. So tell me what you know about Serge.
They call Serge the Black Panther.
Yes.
He had very sleek lines, and sleek is a word that he owns. If you look at him in the side tricep,
I love that pose.
That's his number one pose. He has a couple signature poses. What you rarely see with Serge are certain poses. You don't normally see him in a back lat spread.
Yes.
You rarely see him in a front double bicep pose. So he's a guy that knows how to hide his weaknesses and show off his strengths. Those side twisting shots. That's
what I was going to say. He almost always posed with his quads flared and his waist pulled into the back corner. And it's very much an art to be able to manipulate your physique that way.
Yes.
I've seen people try to nail it and it's not quite right. But yeah, his almost every pose he does is in that. He was one of my shot.
Yeah, he was one of my mentor, John Brown, and he did a lot of mixed pairs. I believe his wife was also a bodybuilder, female side. Serge was also an actor. Really? Did some acting over in France. In 1975, he was in that Mr. Olympia with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I believe he got second.
Okay.
And I believe Lou Ferrigno was third, I believe it was. But he's a tall guy. Okay. He's like 6'1".
Wow.
You can't tell from the photo that he's that tall. He wears it well.
Yeah.
His weakness would have been his back lat spread, his front lat spread. You rarely see, I don't know if I've even seen Serge Nubret do a front lat spread. These are mandatory poses.
He's a little narrow.
They're documented. He knows it.
Yeah.
He was a master at hiding his weaknesses and showing off the grace, the poise, and the classical looks. This guy would have been a classic Mr. Olympia for sure.
So you said he's like 6 feet tall?
He's 6'1".
6'1"?
Yeah, he's a big dude.
I think with whether someone's really tall or really short, I think if the muscle is well proportioned, you can't tell that somebody's short and you can't tell that somebody's tall.
Yeah.
And that's what I've noticed. Like when someone's really tall and their muscle is distributed so perfectly, I'm like, there's no way that person is tall.
Yeah, he's a classic physique. He's along with Steve Reeves.
Yeah.
This look. Serge Nubret. You rarely see this look anywhere. There was only one Serge.
He's just, for me, he's like the epitome of classic. And it is really difficult to find anything from the back. But I also think, he was a little bit narrow, but the art of being able to hide any flaw that you have. So he
ate a lot of horse meat, by the way. It always stands out because he told me I'm a beef eater, right? I'm a carnivore, but he told me he was eating horse, and I'm thinking that has to be some European thing. Yeah, he liked horse meat.
Is that the secret?
He ate very low carbs. He would spend 4 or 5 hours in the gym working out. He did lots and lots of reps.
Really stupid question. The mandatory poses have always been the same. Mandatory poses.
Pretty much, yes.
Okay, so he had to do a back lat spread.
Yeah, back in the days, he had to do
They can hide him in his individual routine, but he couldn't hide it.
You just won't find very many pictures of him. People didn't take pictures of that. They took pictures of his gracefulness, right? Yeah. For example, Arnold Schwarzenegger very rarely does a side tricep. You're never going to find a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger hitting that side tricep.
You can't.
It's not one of his strengths.
Yeah.
So he would maybe throw out his arm and hit it. He would hit it a different way.
Yeah.
There's variations. But Serge Nubret was known for his lines and his shape, not so much his muscularity, but he was a big cat. He was big.
Yeah. Yeah. We have one more that we're going to talk about. Okay, so let's pull it up.
Hey now. Now those are two different people. You realize that, right? We don't all look alike. I'm going to catch you. Yes. Hold on a second.
Did you put Shawn Ray?
It is at first blush, but that's Ronnie Coleman on the right. That's
my goodness. Okay, let's take a break.
No, you don't have to take a break. I want to stay here. Hold on a second. Because what I'm looking at, that's what I would like to look like from the rear. Ronnie Coleman raised the bar for a lot of bodybuilders, and if you didn't know, you could maybe. I would love people to say that was me, and I've been called Ronnie for certain times.
People must have, because I think that Anthony did a search for
it came up under my name,
your back, and that came up under your name.
Well, that's funny because another one, a video search came up and it was Flex Wheeler, and I'm like, I look nothing like Flex Wheeler. I look nothing like that. This back double bicep is the visual that I had when I would train my back. Okay. That's what I wanted my back to look like.
Oh, that's good. But let me just say, let's talk about the photo on the left. Okay.
That is a Per Banal classic right there.
That is the absolute best photo I've ever seen of you in my life.
It was the last time I posed outdoors. This is 2 weeks before the 2001 Mr. Olympia, and that was taken by Paved. That's actually on a hill behind my backyard.
Yeah.
I lived in a canyon, so you had the grassy horse cow area.
Yeah.
I'm barefoot out there. You should have saw me get to that spot,
yeah.
tiptoeing through all the thorns and all that good stuff. But it was a great photo session because the sun captured, this is natural lighting.
Yeah.
The sun captured what I didn't know I had on my physique. Naturally, I carried the last bit of water in my quads. So they're not as separated as my midsection. And I am 2 weeks out from going to stand on stage at a Mr. Olympia. That's natural lighting.
Yeah.
Per Bernal is a black and white photo extraordinaire. He's a great photographer. These are not manipulated. People thought back in the day that, what did they do to your thighs?
A Photoshop
That's
photo.
what my thighs look like. Yeah, they didn't have Photoshop back in 2001. And it captured me in such a way. When I shaved my head, I used to think I looked like Yul Brynner, or at least I wanted to.
Yeah.
But it would only be when I died down and my cheekbones would come out.
Yeah.
And I watched In the King and I and I think it's the 10 Commandments with Yul Brynner. I was always trying to capture that serious look when the camera went off. So I'm not smiling, but I'm not frowning. I'm not grimacing. I want to make it look easy. Hitting this shot takes a lot. So on my left hand on my hip, I'm actually pushing against my leg.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I'm trying to open up my thighs so you can get some detail.
Right.
On the other side, I'm pushing down to my belly button to bring out my tricep, my traps, my deltoids, and I'm blowing out all the air to bring in my serratus, my intercostals on the side of my abdominals.
Yeah.
And then I'm trying to relax my face. There's a whole lot that goes into that pose. And mind you, I am standing on hot, thorny dirt in the middle of high noon in summertime, because the Mr. Olympia was in September.
That puts a lot of context to that photo.
People don't understand that. Like with Ronnie walked off stage, went to the black screen and hit a back double bicep, and it's lights out.
Right, I know.
That's how your back double bicep is supposed to look. His chin is a little bit low towards his deltoid.
Yeah.
He should lift his chin up a little bit in correction, but he's got the glutes.
Yeah.
He's flexing his calf. He's got his wrist turned back, which makes a peak on the bicep. That's a textbook double back bicep by Ronnie Coleman, and I'm flattered that you thought that might have been me.
Well,
mind you, he is 5'11", 260 some odd pounds, and I am 5'7", maybe 215 pounds.
Well,
huge difference in our size and height.
Shawn, you're so well proportioned. I mean, I think a lot of people think that you're taller than you are.
Yeah,
you know,
I like to think that too.
Yeah, but you know, you were definitely in an era where things started shifting.
Sure,
you know,
was right.
We looked at some athletes who had significantly less muscle, and you were holding true to what you believed was the most aesthetic look. You were giving the judges a different option to choose from, but you also had to play the game and try to pack on as much muscle as you could so that you could be competitive.
Sure.
And that must have been such a interesting generational shift, because that's really where things started changing in the world.
Yeah, one of my mentors, John Brown, who started me as a teenager, he wasn't anything more than maybe an advisor as I grew into manhood. But as far as bodybuilding, I did that myself. But when I got second in '94 to Dorian Yates, he said that I could have trained harder.
Yeah.
Of course, he wasn't at the gym training with me. He saw the end result and thought, it's the only. If I should have trained harder, I could have came in bigger, right? Lift heavier weights. I've always said I'm a physique artist.
Yeah.
I never said I was a power lifter. Ronnie Coleman's a power lifter. There's very few people that
yes,
get that kind of muscle. The only way you get that is if you are a power lifter.
I know.
I said in his documentary, he was lifting weights on the other end of the gym that collected dust because nobody wanted to go into that deep end. And I certainly wasn't one of them. But what I was doing, I wasn't doing to please the judges. I wasn't doing it to please the advice of what someone thought I should do to win. I'm training against guys that I don't look like. I don't look like Ronnie Coleman. I didn't look like Dorian Yates. I couldn't be as wide as Kevin Levrone. I couldn't pack on the size that Flex Wheeler could.
Yeah.
So I could only deal with the cards that were dealt me. And I always was mindful that Samir Bannout won the Mr. Olympia at maybe 190 pounds.
That's crazy.
I was always mindful that Chris Dickerson couldn't have been more than 180 pounds, 185 pounds. And that one of my idols, Leila Barada, was barely 175, 180 pounds.
Yeah.
They got there because they stayed true to what got them there. Mm-hmm. These are guys that were lighter bodybuilders beating bigger guys. And I had to always remind myself, bigger's not better.
Yeah.
And if I get too big, my proportions are going to get out of whack. The conditioning's not going to be as tight. I might get hurt lifting this heavy ass weight, like Ronnie Coleman says. And so I knew the boundaries of which I was working in. And when I got to the Olympia stage, my satisfaction came from it just being over. I got through it without an injury. I wanted to win as bad as anybody else because there was a dollar amount attached to it. Yeah, that came close. But the validation came from finishing the race because I knew when the show was over, and Labrada showed me this.
Yeah.
There's more people that look like me and Labrada than that look like Ronnie Coleman and Dorian Yates. They're the dinosaurs that people want to see, but not want to look like.
Quick question. Would you have competed in 212 if that was an option?
No, of course not. I would. I mean, listen, I was, for my time, I was number 1, I was number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5 in the world.
Yeah.
It's a given that I was the best 212 guy. There was no Lee Priest wasn't beating me. Yeah. When I beat Labrada in 1993, he never beat me again. Yeah. Those are the only two. Who else are we talking about? Francis Benfato, he never beat me. Yeah. He was a great young bodybuilder. Mohammed Ben Aziza beat me in my first Olympia in 1988, but he never beat me again after that.
So you pretty much won the 212 Olympia
title. That didn't exist.
If it existed,
the 212 didn't exist, but I was the number 1 212 guy. And if they had separated it, it wouldn't have been.
It wouldn't have felt.
I never wanted to be the best little guy. I wanted to be the best guy. And Ronnie and Dorian were the guys, and Lee Haney, the big three, the guys I was chasing. So would we ask that of Flex Wheeler or Kevin Levrone? Would they do a different division? No, I was beating them too. So
well, you know what? I think that we should continue this conversation.
Yes, there's a whole lot more.
We have so much more, so much more to cover. This is just our introduction to some of the physiques that paved the way. So what do you say you come back,
no
join
problem.
Me, and we can continue this conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot left on the table. Some great bodybuilders that never won the Olympia, but without them, there's no Shawn Ray.
And that's exactly what I want to talk about. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.